My fiancé said medical school was too complex for my female brain and demands I take hospitality instead. I proved him wrong at his own workplace. I still remember the exact moment the email arrived. My hands were wet from rinsing dishes, my hair was tied up messily, and my laptop screen glowed with that single subject line that made my heart slam against my ribs. Congratulations on your acceptance. For a minute I couldn't breathe. I read the first sentence 3 times before I actually believed it. I was going to medical school. After years of volunteering at clinics, tutoring myself through late-night biology chapters, shadowing physicians, and clawing my way through the MCAT, it finally happened. My first instinct wasn't to scream or dance or call my parents. It was to call Ryan, my fiancé of 6 months, boyfriend of 4 years, the person I assumed would be as thrilled as I was. When he picked up, I was smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. I got in, I whispered, half laughing, half crying. Ryan, I actually got in. Instead of cheering, he went quiet. Not shocked, not overwhelmed, just unnervingly silent, like he was calculating something. Then he said, "We should talk about this in person. No congratulations. No, I'm proud of you." Just a heavy sentence that instantly pressed the joy out of me. When he came over that evening, he walked inside like someone arriving to settle a dispute rather than celebrate a victory. He sat across from me, his hands folded in that careful way he used whenever he planned to say something reasonable. He started with a sigh. "I know you're excited," he said, "but we have to be realistic." Realistic. That word still irritates me. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't acknowledge the years of sacrifice. Instead, he talked about timelines, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency, possibly longer. He said those were lost years, years where we'd be delaying marriage, children, buying a house, building a stable life. "You really want to sacrifice all that?" he asked. "For school?" I felt like I was staring at a stranger wearing Ryan's face. "Being a doctor is my life goal," I told him. "This isn't some hobby I picked up yesterday." He leaned back, shaking his head like I was the one being unreasonable. "You know most women in medicine burn out, right? And a lot end up divorced because the career takes over their lives." He pulled out his phone and opened an article he must have had ready. "It's a stressful field. Most women choose something more balanced. More balanced. More feminine. More convenient. For him." I just sat there, stunned, listening to the person I thought loved me reduce my dream to a statistical risk. He tried to soften it by telling me I'd be an amazing mom someday, and medical school would get in the way of that. He said he didn't want our future kids to have a mother who was never home. I asked him why he assumed I wouldn't be home, but he would. He brushed that off, saying his job wasn't as demanding. Then he offered what he called realistic alternatives: hospitality management, human resources, administrative work, careers that won't consume your identity, he said. Careers women usually thrive in. I laughed, shocked, thinking it had to be a joke. But his face didn't move. That's when I realized he wasn't being protective. He was being controlling. The following weeks were filled with arguments disguised as discussions. He'd leave brochures on my desk like little hints he hoped I'd absorb subconsciously. He'd forward blog posts about women regretting demanding careers. He'd show me pictures of visibly exhausted female doctors and say, "Imagine looking like that in 10 years. He even arranged a dinner with his co-worker's wife, someone who had dropped nursing school to support her husband's career. "She's so much happier now," he said, as if parading an example in front of me would magically convert me. It didn't make me reconsider medical school. It made me reconsider him. The final straw in that first wave came one night when I told him again that I wasn't dropping out of my dream. He looked right at me and said, "I'm trying to stop you from ruining your life. You think you can handle medical school, but it's not just intelligence. It's grit. It's pressure. It's long hours. It's everything that women struggle with. I'm just being honest. Women struggle with." I felt something inside me crack. Not break, but crack enough for cold air to seep in. The next morning, I woke up with a headache from crying, made myself tea, and stared at the acceptance letter I had printed and hung on the fridge. At that moment, seeing it felt less like a celebration and more like a challenge. Do you want this badly enough to lose him? What I didn't know then was that losing him wouldn't be a sacrifice. It would be the beginning of saving myself. But at that point, I was still trying to make sense of the fact that the man who claimed he loved me believed I was fundamentally incapable of becoming who I wanted to be. And instead of supporting me, he was actively building a cage out of statistics and realism and gender stereotypes he dressed up as logic. He wasn't afraid of medical school. He was afraid of me becoming someone he could no longer control. And that was only the beginning. Because the moment I quietly enrolled behind his back, everything in both our lives began to unravel in ways he never saw coming. Part 2 reveals the first shift that started exposing who he really was. For a few weeks after that first confrontation, life slid into this strange, quiet tension, like living in a house where someone had turned the volume down on everything except the sound of your own heartbeat. Ryan acted almost too normal. He'd bring me takeout, kiss my forehead, ask how my day was, all while strategically avoiding any mention of medical school. It felt like he thought if he ignored the reality long enough, I'd eventually forget what I wanted. But I didn't forget. I couldn't. And the more he pretended everything was fine, the more I realized he only loved the version of me who didn't push back. The version of me who made herself small. The version he believed would choose him over her own future. So I did the one thing he didn't expect. I enrolled in medical school behind his back. Quietly. Calmly. No dramatic declarations. I clicked accept admission, paid my deposit, scheduled my orientation, and tucked the confirmation email into a folder no one else would see. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But I also knew I needed time. Time to plan. Time to figure out how to transition out of the relationship. Time to build a safety net. I needed income and distance, both emotionally and financially. That's when something surprising happened. A job opened at the medical supply company where Ryan worked. He suggested it himself. Actually. Ironically. You should apply, he said one morning while scrolling through emails. It'd be nice having you at the same company. And it's sales. You're good with people. It doesn't demand too much. Good balance. Balance. There was that word again. Maybe he thought working near him would somehow nudge me toward a reasonable life path. Maybe he imagined himself as the mentor guiding me into the version of womanhood his family admired. Service-oriented, supportive, safely unambitious. But all I saw was opportunity. A steady income. Exposure to medical terminology. Deeper understanding of equipment. And enough financial cushion to start school with less fear. So I applied. I interviewed. I got hired within a week. The irony that his own company became my first stepping stone still makes me laugh. At first, Ryan was ecstatic. He acted like I had finally come to my senses, as if getting a job near him was proof I was settling into the life he carved out for me. He even joked, "See? You didn't need medical school. There are plenty of ways to help in healthcare without all that stress." I smiled politely. But inside, the truth was already anchored. I had one foot out the door. My first week on the job was chaotic in the best way. The company trained new hires through shadowing, so I spent days following different sales representatives to clinics, operating rooms, small surgical centers. I saw devices I'd only ever read about in textbooks, endoscopes, suction systems, clamps, scopes, monitors, port access kits. And to my surprise, understanding them wasn't nearly as difficult as Ryan always hinted. In fact, it felt intuitive. I didn't memorize sales scripts. I understood the equipment. I asked real questions. I connected dots between function and anatomy. Doctors noticed. New rep? One surgeon asked after I explained why a certain laparoscopic tool tended to jam during longer procedures. Yes, I said. Well, you're already better than half the people they've sent us. Word spread fast. In less than 3 months, I was outperforming representatives who'd been there for years. Not because I was exceptional, but because I actually cared about learning the medical side of the products. And the more I learned, the clearer it became that Ryan didn't truly understand his own job. He survived on scripts, not knowledge. On confidence, not competence. And watching me succeed triggered something in him. It started small, little jabs disguised as jokes. You're getting praise because you're new. Don't get too comfortable. Doctors lose interest fast. Sales isn't real medicine. Don't get ahead of yourself. I let it slide. For now. Because I wasn't there to prove anything to him. I was there to build the life he told me I couldn't handle. But everything shifted dramatically at the 3-month evaluation meeting. Douglas, the company owner, had reviewed the new quarter's numbers. And when we all sat in the conference room, coffees in hand, Ryan leaning back like he owned the place, Douglas said, "I want to acknowledge something extraordinary." He clicked the slide, my name in bold letters. In her first quarter, she has increased sales by 40% in multiple territories. That's unheard of. And she's doing it by actually understanding the equipment. Heads turned. People whispered. Ryan's face tightened. Douglas continued, "She's meeting with doctors and explaining features most of our representatives don't even know exist. She's solving issues we've had for years. She is elevating our standard." He paused, then smiled at me. "I want to promote her to regional coordinator." The room collectively inhaled. That was the job Ryan had been eyeing for 2 years. His jaw tensed so visibly I could almost hear his teeth grind. He looked from me to Douglas, then to the table, like the world had tilted without warning. I thanked Douglas graciously, but inside, something cracked open, something fierce, something that had been dormant under all the self-doubt he planted in me. Ryan didn't congratulate me afterward. Not even a forced smile. He walked out before the meeting ended, face stiff, shoulders tense. That night, he didn't speak to me at all. "No, how was your day?" "No, I'm proud of you." Not even small talk. Just silence, the kind that feels like punishment. But punishment only works on people who fear losing approval. And slowly, I was realizing I no longer feared his. The real turning point came at the company Christmas party. I wore a simple navy dress and sat near the front while Douglas went through annual announcements. The room buzzed with laughter until he introduced a new initiative. A part-time medical school sponsorship for one employee, he announced. This year, we created it for someone who has shown unmatched medical understanding within our sales team. He moved aside. My name appeared on the giant screen again. The room erupted in applause. Ryan froze. Literally froze. His hand stopped midair holding a fork. His eyes widened, his entire face drained of color. It was the first time I had ever seen genuine shock break through his carefully curated composure. That moment, that room, that spotlight, it was like the universe held up a mirror to both of us. And the reflection didn't lie. He had spent months telling me my brain couldn't handle medicine. Meanwhile, an entire company believed I could. After the shock of the Christmas party announcement, Ryan avoided me like I carried some kind of contagion, success he didn't want to catch. At work he moved through hallways stiffly, answering questions with clipped, polite sentences, pretending everything was normal while his pride leaked through every crack in his voice. At home, he shut down completely. He'd sit on the couch scrolling through his phone, refusing to look at me, as if acknowledging me meant acknowledging what I had become. What he refused to admit was simple. The version of me he could control was slipping away, and he didn't know how to stop it. When Monday came and I walked into Douglas's office to finalize the sponsorship details, it felt surreal. HR had already prepared a new contract, 3-day workweek, full benefits, tuition support, and paid training responsibilities. They treated me like an asset, not an inconvenience. I signed my new schedule with steady hands. That same morning, Ryan arrived late, hair unbrushed, tie crooked, eyes puffy with the kind of exhaustion that comes from stewing in resentment. He didn't acknowledge me, but he didn't need to. His entire posture screamed, I was supposed to get that promotion. Not you. By lunchtime, the tension was chewing through the office air. People whispered, glanced, then pretended not to. At one point, 2 junior representatives came to my desk asking about the sponsorship program, speaking to me like I was someone worth learning from. I could feel Ryan's eyes burning from across the room as they thanked me and walked away. That was the moment he snapped. He strode into the break room where I was making tea, closing the door behind him with a force that made the blinds tremble. For a second he didn't speak. He just stared at me like he was trying to recognize the girl he once thought he controlled. Finally he said, How long have you been planning this? No hello. No congratulations. Just accusation. I set my mug down carefully, refusing to let him see my hands shake. Planning what? Ryan. This. His voice cracked, anger wrestling with humiliation. Medical school. Behind my back. Making me look like an idiot in front of everyone. You made yourself look that way, I said quietly. His jaw clenched. Don't act superior. I was trying to protect you. From what? I asked. My own potential. He scoffed. From wasting your life. This whole doctor fantasy. It's not a fantasy, I interrupted. It's a goal. You can't handle it. His voice was low, hard. You barely handle stress as it is. And you honestly think you're cut out for surgery? For 13-hour shifts? For people yelling at you? You're not built for that. You're emotional. You get overwhelmed. I stepped forward, not aggressive, just resolute. Stop confusing my empathy with weakness. Stop confusing your insecurities with my limits. He blinked as if I had slapped him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The coffee maker hissed. Someone laughed in the hallway. And in the middle of all that, I realized something with chilling clarity. He wasn't angry because I lied. He was angry because the lie revealed how little authority he had over me. He tried a different angle then, softening his voice like it was a negotiation. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. Talk to someone. You don't have to throw everything away because you're having a phase. A phase. My acceptance letter. My sleepless nights studying. My entire future, summed up in one dismissive word. I'm not throwing my life away, I said. I'm choosing it. His expression hardened instantly. So you're choosing that over me. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was forming slowly, painfully, in the space between us. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. I'm choosing a life where I'm not punished for wanting to grow. He stared at me, stunned, like he had genuinely never considered the possibility that I might pick anything over him. Eventually he stepped back, ran a hand through his hair, and let out a shaky laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. You're being selfish, he said. You're throwing away our future because you're addicted to feeling special. No, I said. I'm leaving behind a future where I'm small. He didn't answer. He just stormed out, slamming the break room door so hard it rattled the microwave. When I drove home that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty in the way people feel after they finally accept a truth they've been avoiding for too long. I parked in the driveway and sat there for 10 minutes, staring at the dark windows, wondering how we had gone from happy engagement to this emotional battlefield. Inside, the house felt cold, quiet. Even the furniture seemed tense. I walked into the bedroom, opened the closet, pulled down the unused moving boxes, and set them on the floor. My hands moved on instinct, grabbing his shirts, folding them neatly, boxing his life one item at a time. Every sleeve, every pair of jeans, every cologne bottle felt like a memory I was packing away, but not out of sorrow, out of necessity. I was halfway through the second box when I heard keys in the lock. Ryan stepped inside, froze at the sight of the boxes, and went pale. What are you doing? He asked, voice hollow. I'm giving you space, I said, and giving myself the chance to start over. He sank onto the edge of the bed, hands in his hair. You can't be serious. I am. He looked up at me then, eyes filled with disbelief, fear, anger, and something else I couldn't name. Maybe the realization that I no longer feared him losing his approval. Maybe the realization that I'd already outgrown the cage he tried to build around me. You're really leaving, he whispered. I already have, I said softly. The next morning, he tried one last tactic, a sudden rewrite of history. He sat across the table with forced calm. I never said you couldn't handle medical school. You're twisting things. You're emotional. You're remembering wrong. I didn't argue. I simply pulled out my phone and pressed play on the voice memo I'd recorded months earlier, Ryan's own voice spilling out into the quiet kitchen. Female doctors become unhappy. Patients don't trust them. Medical school will make you rigid and unfeminine. His face drained of color. There was nothing left to say. By the end of the week, he moved out. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking up to the sound of my own doubts. Ryan moved out on a Saturday morning that smelled like dust and cold air. He didn't speak much, just loaded boxes into his car while avoiding eye contact, as if looking at me would make the breakup somehow more real. When he finally closed the trunk and paused at the end of the driveway, I half expected him to turn around and try one last emotional plea. Instead, he just muttered, "You'll regret this," before driving away. But regret never came. What did come, however, was his mother. Linda showed up unannounced the next afternoon. I was brooming the living room when she knocked, and the second I opened the door, she pushed her way inside like she owned the place. She wore the expression of someone arriving to correct a child's bad behavior. She didn't even sit down before starting. "Ryan is devastated," she declared. "Absolutely shattered. I've never seen him like this." I leaned the broom against the wall. "Linda, he and I broke up for good reasons." She huffed loudly, waving her hand as if brushing away smoke. "You made a rash decision. You let school, destroy an engagement. Do you realize how many women would love to be in your position? A stable man, a home, a planned future, and you threw it away for a degree." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity had finally reached some invisible tipping point. "I didn't leave Ryan for a degree," I said. "I left him because he didn't respect me." Her expression twisted like I'd spoken blasphemy. "Respect? He wanted you to have a good life." "A small one," I corrected. "One I didn't choose." The room fell quiet for a moment, and then her voice sharpened. My son was right. Medical school is too consuming. It turns women into hard, unfeminine versions of themselves. You'll see. You'll come crawling back when you're burned out and alone. That line, unfeminine, was the exact echo of Ryan's words from months before. Suddenly everything clicked. The way she looked at me during holidays. The subtle comments about future grandchildren. The praise she gave me when I cooked dinner but not when I mentioned classes. Ryan didn't invent his worldview. He inherited it. "Linda," I said gently, "your son didn't lose me to medical school. He lost me because he tried to shrink me into something I wasn't." Her face reddened, and she grabbed her purse with a dramatic snap. "Well," she snapped, "when reality hits you, don't expect us to be there for you." And with that, she stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to make the wall picture tilt. I straightened the frame. It felt symbolic somehow. Medical school orientation started 3 weeks later, and stepping onto the campus felt like stepping into a world where I finally belonged. The building hummed with nerves and ambition. Students hurried through hallways clutching schedules, highlighters, and coffees. No one here questioned whether I belonged. No one asked if my brain could handle the curriculum. On the first day of anatomy, I sat in the third row, taking notes so fast my wrist burned. The professor rattled off terminology: thoracic cavity, pericardium, intercostal muscles, and to my surprise, it didn't overwhelm me. My months working in sales had been an accidental head start. I recognized instrument names, surgical processes, even the mechanics behind certain procedures. When the professor asked a question about the purpose of a trochar's design, I raised my hand and answered based on what I'd seen in operating rooms during my sales visits. She blinked, impressed. "You've seen these used?" "A lot," I said. "That practical familiarity will take you far." The validation felt like a warm current through my veins. As the weeks passed, a rhythm formed: work 3 days a week, classes the other days, late-night study sessions, early morning labs. It was exhausting, yes, but in the kind of way that made you proud of yourself when you finally collapsed into bed at night. During one lunch break, a group of my classmates asked about my background. When I explained I'd done medical device sales, their eyes lit up. "That explains why you actually understand the instruments," one said. "I swear half of us are still mixing up clamps." Another laughed. "You're like our cheat code." A part of me, some bruised, long silence part, felt seen for the first time. But even as things flourished at school, fallout continued at work. Ryan had been reassigned to a different territory, and gossip spread like wildfire. One afternoon, a coworker pulled me aside with wide eyes. "Ryan's telling people you cheated on him," she whispered. "That's why he says you broke up." I couldn't even be surprised. This was the pattern. When he failed, someone else had to become the villain. "Let him say whatever he wants," I said calmly. Everyone else saw how he treated me. And they had. His co-workers weren't blind. They saw the tension, the dismissiveness, the resentment. Some quietly congratulated me for leaving him. Some avoided choosing sides. But none believed the cheating rumor. Because insecure men rewrite stories. But reality doesn't bend that easily. 2 months into the semester, biochemistry nearly broke me. The Krebs cycle diagrams blurred together. The metabolic pathways looked like roadmaps drawn by sleep-deprived mathematicians. For 3 nights I sat at my desk, drowning in flashcards, thinking maybe, just maybe, Ryan had been right about this one specific thing. Then I remembered something. 6 months earlier, I didn't know a single surgical tool beyond their nicknames. By the end of my sales role, I could explain their mechanics better than half the representatives. If I could learn all that, I thought, I can learn this. So I rewrote my notes in color-coded sections, watched videos, quizzed myself relentlessly. The day of the exam, I felt steady, not confident, but steady. When the results came, I blinked at my score, stunned. I'd earned one of the highest grades in the entire class. I sat at my desk after class, staring down at the test paper, and something in me healed. Not because of the grade itself, but because of what it meant. It meant Ryan wasn't the voice of truth. He was the voice of limitation. And I had finally stopped listening. 2 weeks later, Douglas emailed me asking if I'd present at the next company meeting. "Would like you to explain how medical knowledge improves sales relationships," he wrote. "Your approach is changing the company." And that brought me to an unexpected crossroad. Even after everything, I was still shaping the environment I left behind. Still proving, unintentionally, just how wrong Ryan had been. The day of the company-wide presentation arrived with a kind of energy that made the entire building feel electrically charged. People weren't just talking about quarterly numbers anymore, they were talking about the medical student on staff, the one who had somehow become the example of what this company could be. I printed my slides early that morning and walked into the conference room with more confidence than I'd ever carried in this building. Not because I felt superior, but because, for the first time, I felt sure of who I was and the direction I was going. Ryan was already there. He sat in the back corner, arms folded tightly, jaw set so sharply it looked like he was clenching his teeth through every breath. His eyes flicked toward me as I entered, but only for a second. He looked away quickly, like acknowledging me would cost him something he didn't want to give. I took my place near the front while employees filtered in. Whispers floated around the room. "That's her, the med student. She boosted sales by 40%. I heard her presentation is going into training modules." No one whispered about Ryan. When Douglas stepped up to the podium, he didn't bother with introductions or numbers. He went straight to the reason the entire staff had filled every seat. "Today," he said, "we're shifting the direction of this company. And it's because one employee proved something that's been missing from our sales approach for years." He turned toward me. "This young woman reminded us that understanding the products we sell at a deeper level, understanding the science, the function, the purpose, makes us better, not only as salespeople, but as partners to the medical teams we serve." He gestured to the screen. "And today, she's going to show us how she did it." The applause was warm, enthusiastic, curiously proud. Even people I'd spoken to only twice clapped like they were cheering on a family member. Except for one person. Ryan's hand stayed glued to his arms. I walked to the podium. The first slide illuminated the room. Bridging medical knowledge and sales performance. I started with a simple question. How many of you have heard a doctor ask something about an instrument that made you freeze, hoping they didn't notice you didn't know the answer? About half the room raised their hands. A few laughed nervously. I smiled. I've been there too. But what I learned is that real understanding, not memorized scripts, changes everything. I walked them through examples from the field. The surgeon frustrated with the torque resistance of a laparoscopic device. The clinic director worried about sterilization inconsistencies. The cardiologist who wanted to compare electrical signal clarity between monitor models. The nurse who explained why certain clamps cause bruising during minor procedures. With each story, I didn't talk about specs. I talked about anatomy, physiology, and clinical application. The room leaned in closer with every slide, as if each explanation unlocked something they had always known they were missing but never had the language for. People took notes. People nodded. People whispered things like, "That makes sense, and why didn't anyone teach us this before?" Then I reached the part Douglas specifically wanted included, the comparative chart showing how territories with medically trained or medically knowledgeable representatives consistently outperformed those without. Every line on that graph climbed. Every upward trend mirrored the exact reality he wanted the company to embrace. And in the back of the room, Ryan shifted uncomfortably, the first real crack in his carefully controlled demeanor. When I finished presenting, Douglas stood again. "This," he said, motioning to me, "is the direction we're moving. This company will no longer settle for shallow product familiarity. We're implementing a new training model, one that prioritizes medical literacy, not just sales technique. And he looked at me, is the reason why." The applause this time was louder. People stood. A few whistled. Ryan didn't clap, but he couldn't hide the flush crawling up his neck. After the presentation, employees swarmed me with questions. How do you memorize anatomy? How do you talk confidently to surgeons? How do you understand how equipment integrates with procedures? I answered everything patiently, even excitedly. I wasn't just helping them. I was watching a culture shift in real time, one that had nothing to do with Ryan's version of what a woman should be. In fact, it was the opposite. Women, young women, middle-aged women, women who had spent years suppressing their ambition, were the ones asking the most questions. They weren't intimidated by the science. They were hungry for it. At one point, a woman from the Southern District pulled me aside. "Seeing you do this," she said quietly, "makes me feel like I can apply for the advanced training program. I always thought it wasn't meant for women." My chest tightened. "It is meant for you," I said. "You're just finally seeing someone who proves it." Her eyes watered. She hugged me. I hugged her back. Across the room, Ryan watched the entire scene with an expression I couldn't quite decode: resentment, confusion, disbelief, all tangled together. Later that afternoon, when the crowd thinned and people returned to their desks, Ryan finally approached me. His steps sounded too deliberate, too forced. I could feel the tension radiating off him before he even spoke. "Congrats," he said, voice flat. "You must feel really proud of yourself." It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. "Thank you," I said, keeping my tone level. He crossed his arms again. "So what now? Everyone's acting like you're some kind of genius." "I'm not a genius," I said. "I just worked hard." "That's not what people think." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're becoming arrogant." I stayed at him. "Or maybe you're uncomfortable seeing me do something you told me I couldn't." His jaw twitched. "You're imagining things," he snapped. "No," I said calmly. "I'm finally seeing them clearly." He didn't respond. Not with words. He just stood there, breathing sharply through his nose, before turning away abruptly and storming down the hallway. I didn't follow. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel small. For the first time since the day I received my acceptance email, I felt completely unshaken by his disapproval. 2 days later, Douglas called me into his office. He smiled. "I want you to help develop a new training curriculum for the entire company." I blinked. "Me?" "Yes. This is bigger than sales numbers now. You showed our team what competence looks like. You've inspired people. You've set a new standard." I nodded slowly. Of course. I'd be honored. As I walked out of the office, the reality hit me. I wasn't becoming the woman Ryan feared. I was becoming the woman he never imagined I could be. The weeks following the presentation felt like stepping into a new version of my life, one I had been building piece by piece without fully realizing it. Every day at work, someone new approached me with a question, a thank you, or a plan they now felt brave enough to pursue. People who used to walk past me without a glance suddenly sought my input on training, equipment, or client strategies. It was surreal how quickly respect replaced doubt once I stopped doubting myself. Even so, whispers about Ryan grew louder. He wore bitterness like a tight collar. He avoided eye contact during meetings, answered questions with clipped tones, and recalled any time my name came up in client conversations. Some colleagues tried to hide their smirks, Others looked uncomfortable. A few even apologized to me privately, not for anything they'd done, but for the way Ryan had spoken about me in the past. He really didn't appreciate what he had, one rep said quietly. He told everyone you were too soft for medicine, another added. He must hate seeing you prove him wrong. I always answer the same way. This isn't about proving him wrong. It's about proving myself right. But deep down, I knew that both things could be true. Meanwhile, medical school was becoming both the hardest and most rewarding challenge I had ever experienced. My second semester had kicked up several gears: pathophysiology, pharmacology, clinical lab, more anatomy, and a brand new avalanche of terminology. Some nights, the flashcards multiplied like they were reproducing under the lamp. There were moments I felt stretched so thin that even breathing felt like another task on my to-do list. But each time the exhaustion crept in, something else rose to meet it: determination. And often, gratitude. I wasn't doing this despite my life falling apart. I was doing it because I finally removed what was holding me back. One day in pharmacology, the professor was explaining how certain cardiac drugs affect electrical conduction. The topic reminded me of heart monitors I'd sold at the company. Without thinking, I raised my hand and explained how signal artifacts could mimic arrhythmias and why certain patients triggered false alarms depending on electrode placement. The professor paused mid-sentence, stared at me, and said, "That's a fantastic real-world explanation. You should consider device research." My classmates looked at me with that same respect I'd felt growing in all corners of my life. Not envy, not irritation, respect. Because I wasn't pretending to know things. I actually knew them. And every hour I spent learning made Ryan's old comments feel smaller and smaller. His insult about my female brain had once been a bruise. Now it was nothing more than a fading scar. Then came the call from Kelly, Ryan's sister. I hadn't heard from her since the breakup. Her contact name flashing across my screen felt strange, almost ominous. But when I answered, her voice wasn't angry or judgmental. She sounded hopeful. "I know this is weird," she said, "but can we get coffee? I need to talk to you." We met at a quiet cafe tucked behind a bookstore. Kelly arrived wearing a nervous smile, clutching a folder of papers like she was holding something fragile. "I wanted to tell you something," she started. "Actually, thank you for something." I blinked. "Me?" She nodded quickly. "Watching you leave Ryan, and everything that came after, made me rethink my own choices." Then she opened her folder. Inside were community college acceptance papers, accounting courses, a plan. "I enrolled," she said proudly. "For years I convinced myself I wasn't smart enough, or that it wasn't appropriate, or that I'd fall behind. But truthfully, I was just scared." I softened. "And you're not scared now?" "Oh, I'm terrified," she laughed. "But I'm doing it anyway. Because you did." Her words hit me harder than compliments from any professor or co-worker ever had. "You showed me," she continued, "that a woman can choose herself, even if her family doesn't approve." Her family, and mine had been her family too, 4 years. When we hugged goodbye, I felt this overwhelming warmth in my chest, not pride, but something deeper. It was the realization that courage wasn't just something you kept for yourself. Sometimes courage spilled over, touching people you never expected. If Ryan had seen that moment, he wouldn't have understood it. Because he never understood what happens when a woman stops shrinking, others start expanding too. Work wasn't done throwing surprises at me, though. One Friday morning, Sienna, the newly promoted director, called me into her office. She closed the door gently, her expression serious but warm. "Sit," she said. "I want to share something with you." I sat today. She leaned forward, folding her hands. "You know I've been evaluating managerial reports." My stomach tightened. Ryan's name flashed through my mind. "There's a pattern I can't ignore," she continued. "Multiple women in the company, 3 in your department alone, filed complaints about Ryan's behavior." My pulse quickened, but I said nothing. He dismissed their ideas, talked down to them, told them they weren't built for certain roles. You can imagine the themes. I could imagine them, because I'd lived them. "After reviewing everything," she said, "I reassigned him out of management. Effective today." I blinked. His Demoted? Yes. She leaned back. And for the record, this decision has nothing to do with you personally. But watching you rise while he stagnated, it made the contrast undeniable. I didn't know what to say. Not because I felt guilty, because I didn't. And not because I felt triumphant, because it wasn't triumph. It was inevitability. He had been trying to control the wrong person all along. Because life is funny, the universe delivered one last twist a week later. I was leaving the hospital after a long day of clinical observation when I saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench near the main entrance. Ryan. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but emotionally. Hollowed out. He didn't see me at first, so I stood there for a moment, watching the man who once tried to break me into a manageable shape. When he finally looked up, our eyes met. And for the first time ever, there was no anger in his face. Just recognition. Recognition of who I had become. Recognition of how far I'd gone. Recognition that he couldn't follow. He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. I simply nodded politely, walked past him, and let the sliding doors close behind me. Because some stories don't need dramatic endings. Some stories end quietly, simply, firmly, with a door closing on the person you used to be, and a whole world opening to the person you choose to become. By the time my second year of medical school rolled into my third, life no longer resembled anything Ryan or his family once tried to define. The days were long, the nights longer, and my calendar looked like a puzzle only sleep-deprived versions of myself could interpret. But I was thriving in ways I never imagined. Everything that had once felt impossible now felt like momentum. During my clinical rotations, I found myself drawn to trauma medicine. Something about the intensity, the chaos, the clarity, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death, ignited a part of me I didn't know existed. While some students panicked when multiple monitors screamed at once, I found myself sharpening, focusing, stepping forward rather than back. Ironically, all those years in medical sales helped me more than anyone expected. I already knew the equipment. I understood the workflow. I didn't freeze when surgeons barked instructions. I'd heard far worse from disgruntled supervisors at my old job. But the biggest surprise came the day the attending surgeon asked for a specialized clamp during a trauma case. A nervous resident handed him the wrong one, twice, until I quietly offered, "Doctor, do you want the blount clamp? It has the angled tips you mentioned." He looked up. "Yes, exactly. Thank you." When the room settled again, he glanced at my badge, then back at me. "What year are you?" "Third." He shook his head slightly, impressed. "You've got instincts. You should consider trauma as a specialty." The warmth in my chest was immediate and electric. Maybe that was the moment I realized the future I once whispered to myself in secret was no longer a fantasy. It was forming, real, tangible, powerful, right in front of me. Back at work, I continued consulting part-time, though now the company treated me less like a salesperson and more like an in-house clinical advisor. I helped redesign training modules, developed simulation sessions, and even sat in during meetings with surgeons to help bridge communication gaps. But the biggest shift wasn't in what I did. It was in how people treated me. Women who once doubted their place approached me with boldness now. Some applied for leadership roles. Some enrolled in degree programs. Some simply stopped accepting dismissive treatment they once tolerated. People often tell you courage is loud. But most courage is quiet. Someone simply deciding they will not remain small. Even men in the office came to me for guidance. Some genuinely wanted to learn. Others were embarrassed by how little they knew in comparison. But one afternoon, something happened that I never expected. Two younger representatives approached my desk, holding printed copies of the medical terminology sheet I'd created. "Hey, one of them said awkwardly, "We wanted to say, thanks. You made the whole company better." The other nodded. "And, sorry about how people treated you before. It wasn't fair." I didn't need an apology. But hearing it felt like closure I didn't know I'd been craving. The true turning point arrived at the end of my fourth year when residency applications were due. I spent nights refining my personal statement, trying to balance confidence with humility, ambition with authenticity. When I submitted it, I felt something I hadn't expected: peace. Match day came fast. The auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. Students clutched envelopes like they were holding detonators that could either blow up their dreams or launch them forward. I found a quiet corner, hands trembling as I slid my thumb beneath the seal. The letter opened smoothly, as if it had already been waiting for me. I read it once, then again, then a third time before the words registered. I matched into trauma surgery, at one of the top programs. My first choice. My knees went weak, not because I doubted myself, but because I finally realized something monumental. I had made it to a place Ryan never believed I could reach, and I did it without dimming myself to fit inside the version of womanhood he approved of. As people around me celebrated, I stood there quietly letting the moment soak into my bones. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even pride. It was freedom. Pure, unshakable freedom. Graduation arrived months later. When I stepped onto the stage in my cap and gown, the auditorium lights felt warmer than they should have. My family cheered loudly from the back row, my mother crying openly while my father clapped like his hands were trying to speak every emotion he couldn't voice out loud. I didn't know I'd been chosen to speak until my name appeared on the ceremony program. Apparently the faculty had voted anonymously. I stood at the podium and looked out over hundreds of faces, some shining with hope, others scarred by exhaustion, all of them carrying the weight of years of sacrifice. I didn't give a speech about grades or accomplishments or sleepless study nights. I talked about something else instead. I'm here today, I began, because I stopped believing the voices that told me I wasn't capable. And if any of you ever heard those voices, inside your head or from someone who claimed to love you, I want you to know they were wrong. You belong here. Not because you were perfect, not because you were always confident, but because you refused to give up. The applause was soft at first, then grew like a wave rippling through the room. As I stepped off the stage, my attending, an unshakably serious man, patted my shoulder. "You're going to be a hell of a surgeon," he said. I believed him. People ask sometimes if Ryan ever reached out again. He did. Once. It was a short message after my residency match announcement. "Congratulations. You proved me wrong." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry. Because I no longer needed answers, apologies, or closure. His opinion had no weight in the world I built. His voice, once so loud in my life, was nothing but a faint echo behind the closed door of a life I no longer lived. The night before I started residency, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker like stars scattered across the ground. I thought of every choice that led me here, the doubts, the heartbreak, the studying, the long shifts, the terrifying exams, the victories, the losses, the small wins that added up quietly. And I realized something powerful. I didn't just become the woman I wanted to be. I became the woman I needed when I was being underestimated. A woman who didn't shrink. A woman who didn't bend to fear. A woman who carved out her own life, even when others tried to map it for her. And that, I realized, was the true ending to this story. Not the breakup, not the presentation, not the match letter, not even the degree. The real ending was this. I grew beyond every version of myself that once settled for less, and walked straight into a future I built with my own hands.